Hi there, it's Grace Kraaijvanger. Welcome back to the Art of What's Next podcast, and I think you're going to love today's episode. I'm thrilled to be in conversation with Gavin Larsen, author of Being a Ballerina, The Power and Perfection of a Dancing Life. You may know that I grew up in the world of ballet, and I went on to dance professionally as a contemporary dancer. Dance is so near and dear to my heart, and I feel strongly that I learned lessons from dance and being dedicated to an art form that have informed my career, my business, my commitment to creativity, and certainly this podcast dedicated to creating next chapters. In today's conversation, Gavin and I go deep on the creative process, the day-to-day rituals of being a writer, a view into writing a memoir, and most importantly, how we can live our lives like artists. I'm so excited to welcome Gavin Larsen to our show. I'm really delighted to be joined today by a ballet dancer and author of this beautiful book, Being a Ballerina, The Power and Perfection of a Dancing Life by Gavin Larsen. So Gavin, I'm so happy that you're here today. Before we jump in, I'm going to tell everyone a little bit about you, and then I know they'll learn more about you through our talk. But Gavin received her professional dance training at the School of American Ballet, the Pacific Northwest Ballet School, and the New York School of Ballet. She was raised in New York City. She joined Pacific Northwest Ballet. And then as I learned through the book, she went on to Alberta Ballet. She was in Suzanne Farrell's ballet company. And then she went on to have another stage of her beautiful career at Oregon Ballet Theater. She's now writing and teaching. She's been a guest teacher for schools in Japan and Canada. She writes for one of my favorite magazines called Point Magazine. And in writing this book, I just was really mesmerized by Gavin because there's so often at the Highbury, I've talked about creating our lives as artists, creating our lives as a work of art. And I feel like she transferred so much of what I love about dance and the discipline and perseverance of dance. And then she transferred that into yet another art form for her through her writing. So I found out about Gavin through the New York Times, and I basically devoured the book. And now I'm just delighted, Gavin, to have this time to chat with you and get to talk about your book.
Oh, thanks so much, Grace.
It's a delight. So I'd love to know, when did you first know that you were meant to write this memoir about being a ballet dancer?
You know, it's funny. There was not a one aha moment. It really evolved. I did not start out intending to write a book at all, let alone my memoir. And it did evolve. After I retired from performing, like right after I retired, I segued immediately into just teaching, which most, a lot of dancers do.
Yeah.
And I was still involved in Oregon Ballet Theater. I was teaching in their school, and I was doing a little work with the company, kind of coaching and stuff. And one day I was leaving the building, the studio building where the company and the school shared space. I had just finished teaching a class, and I was walking out, and my eye caught through the studio window a glimpse of the company rehearsing The Rite of Spring, a ballet that I had been in, I don't know, a season or two before. And it was the most bizarre kind of out-of-body dreamlike experience. I was standing outside looking in at other people, but I could see and feel myself in there. Wow. I could literally feel it in my body because it was so close, right, physically. And I was kind of like struck by lightning at that moment. And I thought, I have all of these like visceral memories, physical memories of my 18 years of professional dancing and 10 years of training before that. And I suddenly got really scared that every day that passed between me and those events happening, I would lose them and they would start to fall out of my grasp. And I was terrified of that because it was, it's me. It was it's not just like a part of my life, it's a part of me.
Absolutely.
And so I literally went right home from that moment. I sat down on my computer and I wrote it. I wrote a 2-page essay that's now in that book. It's the chapter that's called The Human Monolith. Yes. And that got the ball rolling. but I didn't, that wasn't like starting the book. That was just me like spewing out as a way to preserve all of these episodic memories, because I never kept a journal or a diary, anything like that. I had really, tiny little bits, but I had nothing really to commemorate it. I didn't have that many videos. I didn't have that many photos. And I wanted to not just capture them, but like reassess them for myself. I want to reevaluate them all, because I
That's
knew
so
like,
It's so surprising to me that you didn't keep a journal, because one of the things I love so much about your book is just the level of detail that you were able to provide that really um, it really brings you into the story in a way. I felt like I was in the studio or on the stage or putting on your shoes. Like I felt like I was with you. So I mean, I really want to commend you that just the way that you recanted some of the memories. I'm amazed. I just assumed that you had been keeping a journal the whole time. It's
no,
incredible that that came from your memory.
that's thanks. I mean, other people have said that too. And I was like, really? I guess that's the way my memory works, is like snapshots,
Hmm.
snapshots of events and of like flashes of moment. That's why so many of the chapters in the book are so short.
Hmm.
Some of the sections are even just like a paragraph or two. And I had initially even titled each of those like snapshot. And so as I accumulated more and more of those bits and pieces, I started to realize that, well, I'd accumulated them, and I thought, I want to do something with this, because it felt really neat to have this collection of things in paper, well, on screen in the computer. And so I started to think I could string them together and form a like a quilt or a collage
Right.
and of a book, and that would kind of create the arc of a dancing life. So then I had to go back and to start to fill in all of the time gaps, because this was mostly my professional life. So that's when I went back and I wrote the beginning sections about training and growing up in dance and discovering it, discovering myself through it. So it was written completely not chronologically, completely haphazard.
But I loved how there's a way that you write as well, where you step in and out of first and third person. And it's so intriguing, first of all, too, because I think it's in the beginning when you're talking about your early training, where you talk about the 9-year-old and the teenager, and you label yourself that way. And I've actually never experienced that style before. And what it does is, again, it brings the reader in with you. Like I felt like I was you. I was trying on this experience with you. And
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that. I thought that
Well,
was really.
I'm so glad, because that's exactly what I wanted. That's exactly what I wanted. That's why I did it that way. Well, one reason why I did it that way, but that's what I really wanted, was for the reader to feel
Yeah.
like they were them, like it was them,
Yeah.
versus if I just told it like, well, I went to the class and I did this and I did that. It removes the reader from the experience. And part of my goal of this book, once I had established that I was going to try to make it a book and I had a goal, was to bring the reader like truly into the world,
Yes.
into the body and into the soul and the psyche and the mindset
You
of,
definitely did that. You definitely did that. Yes, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but go ahead.
oh, that's great. It's like so good for me to hear that it had that effect for you.
What it's interesting is I've been writing a lot since I started the Hivery almost 8 years ago. And always in the back of my mind, and sometimes in the front of my mind, was that I wanted to write a book of all of my writings. And one I had a writing teacher at one point that taught me about writing in scene, so you could really bring the reader into the scene of the memory. And I felt um, stronger than I've really ever felt before, the way that you pulled someone into the scene. And I'm curious what it's like, because as a dancer, there were so many things about what you described that were really familiar to me. But I can also imagine that for non-dancers, they were able to be pulled into the scene because you provided that detail and just that whole experience.
Yeah. Yeah. That was another thing that emerged as I continued on with this process, was a desire to, kind of dispel some of the myths about ballet that non-dancers have, and to accurately and vividly, but not melodramatically, express the truths about those details, about
Yeah.
the physical sensations and the practical matters of the point shoes and the daily grind and the getting ready for the performances, the costumes and the rehearsal process. And so putting that into those scenes, like you just mentioned, that seemed to me like another good way to create these little portraitures that a reader can like grasp really easily and feel for themselves.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm so curious too, because again, I've talked about this with the High Read before. Like, I feel like so much of what I learned as an entrepreneur, so much of what I do as an entrepreneur was informed by ballet training and by dance training. Like, I feel like I learned how to combine creativity and vision with discipline. And I learned that in the dance studio. I'm curious what parts of your training and your career then influence your life as a writer. Do you feel like you brought all of that into your writing as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. People think, at first glance that how can dance and writing have similarities because one is completely physical, one is completely solitary and static. But the exactly what you said, like the practices involved in becoming and being a dancer are exactly the same as like many other creative pursuits. And so it's the discipline involved in having an idea and then following through on executing it.
Mhm.
Exactly what I learned as a ballet student. You're given the information and you see a vision of what it could or should look like. But then after you're given that, it's up to you. No one can get inside your body and do it for you. You have to do it yourself. The teacher is there. They can give you cues and they can give you instructions, but they can't get inside and manipulate your body. Only you can. So it's a very empowering practice.
Mhm.
That's something that a lot of people don't realize about ballet or, dance in general, but I think more particularly ballet, is how empowering it is for the student and then for the professional when you get there, because your self-worth and the discipline and the satisfaction of that, but the feeling of given information, translating it to yourself and knowing that you have the power to execute it into something greater, to whatever it is that you want it to be. So I can absolutely see why that would translate into your work as an entrepreneur. And it definitely translated into mine as a writer. I had never undertaken anything purely creative as a dancer, or as an interpretive artist. I didn't
Right.
choreograph. I just did other people's choreography. So the concept of creating a work of my own was, if I thought about it too hard, it was really like, oh, I can't do that. Then
Mhm.
as I did it, every little piece that I created, I realized I did just do that. And
Right.
it was similar to advancing through ballet and that feeling of, I never thought I could do that. I never thought I could be that type of dancer. But then every little day, every little step takes you a little closer to that. And you don't even realize you're there until you're there.
It's that's so beautifully said, and I think it's really important, whether it's for writers or entrepreneurs or artists, to hear from others, because what I loved as I was reading the book is the reminder for all of us, now with social media and things like, what we have this kind of noise in our society that tells us that people are overnight successes, and they wake up one morning and they have 200,000 followers and a book deal and a thriving business, and I mean, I know from ballet and I know from business that all of these things are harder than it appears on the outside. And part of that with ballet is the magic of, like, of course we make, you made it look easy, but I loved in the book just how you really reinforced the day to day, the repetition of like getting up like there was a scene in the book where you talk about getting out of bed and just how it hurt. And then you laid on the floor and you stretch and you did and I admired that scene so much because it reminds people, no matter how easy and beautiful it looks on stage or on social media or in various places of our lives, that there's so much that goes into the behind the scenes.
Yeah.
I thought it was such a beautiful metaphor for just a lot of things, of realizing that like the overnight success thing is kind of a myth.
It's
Like,
a total myth. It's a total myth. Yeah. Yeah. I know I've always thought in all aspects of things in life that it's all about the details. It's all about the small moments. Our lives are millions of small moments, and the grandeur of any great accomplishment is those millions of little steps and little building blocks and little moments that create the beauty of our lives and the power of our lives and the meaning in our lives and in our accomplishments. And so as I was writing this, I really emphasized, instead of like the big hurrah, glory moments, I took some of those and I dissected them down into like minute by minute, second by second explanation of what goes into making that moment so exhilarating, on stage. The glory and oh my gosh, the incredibleness of some of those moments of performance, they are built on 1,000 little sections that build up to that thing. And so I wanted to explain that to people. And same thing in the overall daily life, the daily life of the dancer. It's colored, and its richness is in like the little moments. Mm-hmm. And I tried to portray those in those little snapshot sections of my book, like running up the stairs to my dressing room, madly about to change costumes before the next ballet after the first one finishes. But it's like this moment of clarity where I can see what I just did, what I have to do, and like a snapshot moment of like the feeling of just being there and being human. And I just wanted to capture that, because that is almost more important than what just happened on stage. And I think that's true in our lives, just as people. It's important to seize those.
It's so beautiful, because I think, I could even feel the energy even as you were describing it, and feel the dash between pieces that you had to run to your dressing room, you had to change, and like you said, like you're reflecting back on what you did and you're getting centered for what you have to do. And I think in this time, and it's been a real push and pull of having presence. And so when you were just describing that, I'm like, it's so coveted to just have that presence of like, you have no choice but just to be present with exactly what it is. And like you said, what you've done and what you have to do in a flash.
Yes, that's exactly it. It's presence. It's being, we're all present in all moments because we're human beings and we're around, but it's recognizing those moments of presence and grasping them. And you can hold on to them because, it's time and time passes. But to me, it's recognizing them and savoring them, and just holding them dear, those moments of presence and clarity.
That's so beautiful. I'm curious what this process has been like for you as you reflected back on those scenes and you reviewed your life, right? This, because like you said, you created these vignettes that welcomed us into these various chapters of your life as a dancer. And I'm curious what that brought up for you. That must have been an emotional process. And I'm curious what that was like. What was that experience like?
Yeah, it really was an emotional process. I felt like I was putting myself through counseling or therapy or something. It was great. It was, it taught me a lot about myself. And particularly when I went back and I wrote the first half of the book, which is about my childhood and teenage years and training and getting my feet wet in dance and figuring out that was the path I was going to follow. Mining those memories and depicting them in words, it taught me about why I am the person I am today, and why I have the characteristics that I have, and why I was the dancer that I was, based on the way I reacted in those early years and early scenes. I was very quiet. I was timid, very timid in certain settings, but then in the ballet studio, I was timid yet bold also. I was very scared. I was very insecure. I was very shy. I was very afraid of doing anything wrong. Right. And so I was an excellent follower with this sense of like almost panicky sense of I must not show that I don't know. I must not show that I don't know what I'm doing. I must pretend to know everything, because if I can't ask a question. I don't know why it never occurred to me that I could ask a question. I just thought I can't. And that informed the way I moved through life. And so, which is sometimes good and sometimes not good. It was years later when I evolved enough to feel free to ask questions that I knew could help me, and to be able to put aside my pride
Mm-hmm.
and be unafraid to show vulnerability, and to learn that asking for help and asking a question is not a sign of weakness at all. It took me a long time to learn that. And as I was writing this book, I could see exactly when that point happened for me.
Yeah.
It was late. I was in my 20s before that
Yeah.
happened. Yeah. I mean, and it, I don't want to say have regrets, but it was very easy to see where if I had learned that earlier, that I could have evolved into a different type of dancer, perhaps. But seeing that now is plenty good, and
Right.
will carry me forward for sure. So it was very interesting I recommend it for anyone, whether or not you're going to write your memoirs or not. But I really do recommend, doing more than just remembering, oh, when I was a kid, I did that. Looking at it a little bit more closely and maybe writing it down, maybe trying
Yeah.
to create a scene, just a descriptive scene without you in it. But like I did, as you were maybe creating a movie scene, writing the script, writing the dialogue as if you were a viewer, even though you are inside it.
So that you can better understand it, right? So you
So
can
you
kind
can
of
better
go
understand.
deeper into the reflection and really understand. Because
Yeah.
even, there's part, as you were talking, I was like, well, there's part of just the nature of ballet class, and especially when we're younger, like we were always taught to be so quiet, like, no, I never used my voice because I was kind of afraid.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's interesting that you were like, you realize that you didn't really give yourself permission to ask questions, because it also felt like that environment wasn't very inviting of questions. So you did just have to figure things out. And maybe that is a skill that as we mature as people, we realize, oh, I could actually just ask. But it wasn't that. I can see how that wouldn't be obvious as a young ballet student.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And actually that leads, I mean, something else I should mention with that, my strategy in writing it kind of as like a outsider looking in, was also to allow myself as a writer to be brave enough and free enough to be fully forthcoming,
Hmm.
fully truthful, and yeah, to lay it all out there and say it exactly as it happened, because I wasn't talking about myself. Even though I was talking about myself, it's not in my voice. I'm
Yes.
describing this other little girl. And so that allowed me the freedom that I used to feel when I was a dancer on stage. It was the same exact kind of remove. As a dancer on stage, you're not really you. You're in a costume. You're portraying a character. You're doing a
Right.
role. You're doing someone else's choreography. And that allowed me, and you're also on stage, and there's a buffer between you and the audience, and the performance is happening. No one's going to stop you. So that gave me the power and the bravery to dance bold and huge and to be loud without using my voice.
Right.
Same thing with writing this way, without putting myself as like naming myself as that character. It allowed me to be really bold as a writer.
I can feel it. I mean, I can feel it in hearing you talk, and I could feel it in the writing as well. And I think it's a really brilliant strategy because I know I've been told by some people that have written memoirs that it like almost crushed them, like it like broke them open because there was no distance. And I've heard from other writers that they had to wait a really long time between events before they could write about them because of that, just the fragility of some of the memories. So I
Yeah.
think that's a really interesting technique.
Yeah.
Or,
Yeah, sorry.
yeah, that's really, I just think it's really beautiful to give yourself some space from it so that you can go deeper.
Yeah, and it happened just organically. Yeah, I didn't think, okay, this is going to be really hard. The only way I can do this bravely is if I put it in the third person. I just started writing it that way.
Happened.
And then I realized later, oh, I think this is what I'm doing.
Yes, yes.
And then actually the latter half of the book, when I do describe it in my own voice, and I'm very personal about it, and name myself, I use my own voice. That was where it did get very hard, because first of all, those years are much closer now.
Yeah.
than when I was 8. They're much closer and much rawer. But by then I had emboldened myself enough through the writing of the early bits, to be just like, you know what? You've already laid it all out there. You can't stop now.
Right. And
And
it's interesting because as a reader, it made me feel really close to you and to the work. So like there's your farewell performance where the roses are being showered down on you and the whole like and all the even in the dressing room, the piles of flowers and like I mean, I was so happy for you, like I felt this feeling of like, oh my gosh, what a send off. And just all these people literally like throwing love toward you. I thought it was a really beautiful scene.
it was.
I think you built up to that because by the end, it was like this triumphant thing where like, as a reader, I felt like I had gone through the process with you
Yeah.
of everything to get to that moment.
Yeah.
Really.
Cool. That's exactly what I was hoping readers
Yeah,
would feel.
there was so much excitement in that scene. I'm excited for people to read it because it feels like I really felt it inside.
Yeah.
It
Oh,
was
good,
beautiful.
good. And so that's what I want readers to feel too. It's not just like me going, oh, I had this great big thing. I want us all to feel like that sense of like community, that
Yeah.
sense of like the give and the take over the buffer of the stage to the audience. And yeah, it really is a back and forth.
Speaking of community, I'm curious how other dancers have responded
Oh,
to.
amazing. It's
Yes.
been overwhelming. I mean, yeah, some of the notes and comments and things that other dancers who read it have told me moved me to tears. They say they're being moved to tears because, they say some people have said like, I don't have to tell my own story because you just told it for me. I can see myself in this book. Like this is exactly brings up all these feelings and memories, and some of them very painful and some of them so rich and exciting and happy. And again, that was another thing that evolved and emerged as I was in the process of writing it. I wanted to tell not just my own story, but that of all dancers.
Right.
Actually, an early title of the book was The Everyday Ballerina or The Every Woman Ballerina or something like
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
because it's the story of us all.
Right.
We all go through those evolutions and those experiences with different details, of course, in slightly different circumstances, but those emotional highs and lows, the physical highs and lows, the psychological developments, the life journey is the same pretty much.
Yeah.
And so in writing this and in sharing it, I wanted all, like, as a community of dancers, us to reinforce, like, we're all together, we have this bond
Right.
that it's invisible, but it's there. And so, yeah, it's been really gratifying to hear other dancers reacting, so feeling so connected to it.
Yes, I know I felt that. I felt that in spades. I really it was kind of beautiful to feel again. Like I felt like I had missed that feeling of like connection and honoring of dance and honoring of like that our bodies are our instrument and just there was so much in there where I feel like that had faded for me a bit and you brought me back to it.
Aw.
So that was really, really beautiful. And then for non-dancers, I'm curious what you've heard from non-dancers I know that one of your intentions was to dispel some of the myths around ballet that have been kind of fed to us through movies and things like that. So what has the response been from non-dancers? What have they learned?
It's been really interesting. A few people have said things along the lines of like finding parallels in the ballet world that they never thought they would see between the ballet world and their own pursuit, whatever it happens to be. One guy who wrote to me, what was it? I think it was, oh my gosh, yeah, he said he spent a lot of time in Alaska doing like ice fishing.
Yeah.
And he said, I felt myself in your path, in your journey as a dancer. I felt that in my pursuit as an ice fisher in Alaska, like the same kind of mentality and stoicism and joys and waiting. And I was like, oh, I never would have thought of that. And Yeah, other artists in different fields have reacted really neat. Some really neat things they've said that, the artist way, the creative way, it's
Yes.
like it's one way, though again, the circumstances may differ slightly, and obviously the details of the practice differ, but the mentality and the approach and the fluctuations, it's all there, and it's really resonating with a lot of people. And then also plus just people who have not been inside the ballet world, learning about like what it really is like. And that doesn't mean extra melodramatic or extra boring or extra glamorous, but just plain old facts
Right.
is very revealing.
Which is around your creative process for writing the book. Like what, because you talk a lot about the day-to-day of being a dancer in the book. And I'm also interested in the day-to-day of being a writer. So tell us about what that was like for you, and like, how long it took, what your routines were like, your rituals around it.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I think it's pretty interesting too, because as I explained a little while ago, I began writing it in a very haphazard fashion. I didn't suddenly like become a writer and sit down at my desk all day long and write.
Right.
I was mostly like teaching. And then every so often I would get inspiration and I would like sit down and jot down an essay. So that was very haphazard. And it was really just when I had the time, or, on the weekend, I'd take my laptop to a coffee shop and be like, hey, there was that one time when I danced that one ballet. I remember that rehearsal. That was I'm going to write that one as an essay.
Right.
Sort of like that. And then after a little while, I wanted, as a dancer, you're trained like very, very detailed training. And as a writer, I felt like I was just flailing, I was just spewing it out. No one had taught me a thing. And I was like, I want my instructions. I want to be trained. So I took a memoir writing workshop, and it was fabulous because it was a very small group of us, and the woman who was instructing it, all she did was every week she gave us a title prompt and said, your assignment for next week is to write a 2-page essay on this title, underneath this title, whatever you want to go,
Right.
and that was exact kind of what I had been doing. It was about 2 pages each, and so this is perfect for me. And her title prompts were so inspiring. And all 5 essays that I wrote for that memoir workshop are in the book now. Each one is a chapter. And so that kind of got me a little bit more consistent with it. And at that point, I'd accumulated enough that I was getting really excited about this, and I wanted to focus on it intensely. So I started applying for artist residency programs, and I got one at in Taos, New Mexico, the Wurlitzer Foundation, in 2015. And so I went there for 3 months. I did nothing but write. And it was absolute bliss, absolute bliss. I didn't have any teaching to do, no coaching, no nothing. My sole purpose was to work on the book. And it was a beautiful program because there are no expectations or obligations. You don't have to like produce anything concrete at the end of it. You're just given time and space to work on your project. And that was the first time I felt like a writer. I felt like I could call myself that. We were in a little community. There were 8 of us, 8 artists in residency at that time, writers, musicians, visual artists. And we'd get together once a week and share our work. None of them had anything to do with ballet ever. And so, we had a little introduction event, and we were all, talking about what we did. And at first it was the first time I'd ever not introduced myself as a dancer. And I realized, oh my gosh, I have to figure out, what do I say when someone says, what are you doing here? And I said, oh, I'm a writer. And they said, well, what do you write? And I was like, what do I write? I write about dance. And so we would share our work every week, and their reactions and their responses to my little essays about episodes of the dancing life got me very inspired, because they were so compelled.
Right.
They were so interested in it, and yet they had no prior knowledge about ballet. So that was my first real evidence, solid evidence, that non-dancers could be fascinated, could be hooked by the ballet life.
Yeah.
And that really motivated me to keep going and to go deeper and deeper and deeper in it. So that happened. And then I came back home from that 3-month residency program. And I devoted about there were days when I could not write, but nearly every day I got at least a little bit more progress done. And at that point I was starting to shape it. I thought I had enough pieces, and I was starting to put the collage together, put the quilt together. And then I was also starting to look into publishing and that whole world.
Yes.
So that's when it got a little bit more consistent, but it was still haphazard. I mean, I still was teaching most of the time, and that was my main gig. So I guess that's how a lot of writers actually do it. They do something else and then they write when they have time.
Well, it's interesting. One of the things that we focus on at the Hivery and that makes the Hivery unique is that we're so dedicated to creating the next chapter, right? Like, it's because I think when you're kind of in the in between is when it can be scary and uncertain and vulnerable, and again, you helped me to feel with you what it was like when you did the final curtain call, and then you're off into this next chapter to go create your life.
Yeah.
And I think it's really inspiring and beautiful to see how it shaped into, like, it wasn't like you said, just one day you went from dancer to writer. You had to go through, and I sometimes I tell people at the Hivery, I'm like, you kind of have to go through the muck of it. Like, you have to like muddle through it a bit in order to see the light or see the clarity of, like, okay, I want to follow that. And I don't exactly know where I'm going, but I'm going to follow that. So I really appreciate in your story, um, just even what you just shared, the vulnerability of what it's like to go from calling yourself one thing to calling yourself another. And someone says, like, what do you write about? And you're like, I when I first started the Hivery, I remember um, someone had asked me what my title was. And it took me a long time, like, to actually be able to say that I was the CEO of a company. I didn't have those words ready yet because I couldn't identify as that yet. So I really relate to what you're saying.
Yeah.
And at one point, someone gave me a business card on the back that said artist. And
Oh,
I felt like, I kept that business card on my computer for a long time because I'm like, I felt like I needed an identity. I'm like, I'll be an
yeah.
artist, even if it's an artist of business is fine. But I needed like an anchor. So I appreciate you telling that story.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true. It's all an evolution. I don't know. I mean, even as a dancer, I never really felt like I had arrived because there
Mhm.
was always more going on. It
Yeah.
was the process was always turning. It was always
Yeah.
going. It was always evolving. And so I never really felt like I was there. You
Right.
say, like, when did you made it? When did you make it? And when do you feel like you made it? I don't know if I ever feel like I made it. And I think the same thing is true with writing now. I mean, I
Yeah.
guess I can call myself an author now that I have a published book, but there's going to be more. And now people are going to expect me to write another book. And can I still call myself an author if I don't write another book? And I mean,
Right.
I think we all feel that no matter what your line of work or your pursuit or your profession
Yeah.
is. I think it's actually helpful and healthy to look at it that way, as a constant
I
evolution, because once you've made it and you're sitting there on your platform, then it's over.
I completely agree with you, and I think it's so at the Hiver we talk about a framework of we start out the framework as being a seeker. So when a seeker is clarifying and probably feels a bit overwhelmed by the unknown, like really looking for the next chapter. And then we talk about people moving into being a builder of, like, I've identified something I want to do and I'm building it, whether it's like a book or a business or a nonprofit. And then a scaler is someone who's like taking that to the next level. But what I think is really interesting is the process from when we go back again in the circle from scaler to seeker again, because and we all do that, and it's actually really reassuring to know that we will become seekers again. There will be yet another metamorphosis, and it doesn't have to feel like beginning, intermediate, advanced. It's more a circle.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think you're defining that really beautifully, as that kind of like we're always evolving and reinventing that next chapter. It's
Yeah.
not done.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not done. And that actually, that concept has helped me come to terms with not being a performer on stage anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
And knowing that it's just part of my life's evolution, and that part is not gone, and it's not less valuable or less valid because it's in the past. It's still there. It's still a part of me. It's just something that I'm using now to move forward into something else. And that's helped me come to grips with that type of transition, is using it as a way to move forward into this other thing, even though I'm not giving up that. I may not practice it actively anymore, but I'm not giving it up. I'm still holding on to it, and I'm taking it with me into my next thing.
Yes. Oh, I just love it. I love it. I'm curious what advice you have. I initially I was going to ask you what advice you have for other dancers or artists as it relates to creating the next chapter, but I'd kind of like to open the question up a little bit too, of like, what advice do you have for all of us as it relates to creating a next chapter? And it can be in like directed toward dancers or not, but again, that I think that's what I found so admirable about you kind of guiding us through your story, is that we became privy to all of those transitions in your life, and then beyond, that we get to watch this next transition for you as an author. So do you have advice for others that are creating that next chapter?
Yeah, it's the advice I give myself all the time, and my sister, actually, who's a photographer, creative person, also gives me all the time too. Is to stand back and watch for it to emerge. When I was changing companies several times during my ballet career, I never felt a sense of panic that I wouldn't find my next job. I had this weird sense of naivete that it's out there. Your next job is out there. You just have to find it. And it comes down to how dogged you are in your pursuit and how widely you cast your net. And if you're very narrow in your focus of trying to find something, you're probably not going to find it. You have to open up the beam of your flashlight really, really wide so that you can see everything and consider everything, and then find the one that's welcoming you. And as a writer now, that's what I'm doing as I'm trying to figure out, for example, what am I going to write next? I everyone's like, so what's next? What's the next book going to be? I have no idea. I don't know. Am I a fraud? But I have a million ideas. I don't know which one is going to emerge strongly and loudly enough and to be most compelling to follow. And my sister, the same thing. She just did a photography book, and she's always got all these ideas for, she's got these great photo collections. She's like, I don't know what to do with this. And so we talk to each other and we say, let it sit there. You'll figure it out. And it will present itself to you. And so I think that's the advice I would give to anyone in a creative field, or even not, looking for their next thing. I think we're always in such a rush and feel this pressure, societal pressure, to like get there and do it and be active and be pursuing something, instead of maybe taking some time, giving yourself the freedom and the space to sit back, look around, open your eyes, open your ears, open your brain, and just let the thoughts come to you, let the ideas come to you, and see which one emerges the strongest and the loudest, and that keeps pulling you forward, and that you feel drawn to do. You cannot force it. If you force it, it's going to be painful, and it's not going to be very effective, particularly in a creative pursuit.
I think that's such a vital lesson for all of us to consider, because I think in an age of social media, there is such a even subconscious decision to compare, like what one other person does that's their success, or somebody like they wrote a book and then they did whatever, and so we think, well, then maybe that's the path, maybe. But you're absolutely right that it's almost like it's almost like our bodies or our subconscious knows when we're not really into it, when it's kind of like I should do that. It's like we kind of subtly even resist, because it's like, no, that's actually not what I want. So
that happened to me when I was writing. I would write lots of chapters and things I wrote, and I was like, this is forced. I'm forcing this. So it was out. It never made it. Because when it's, I guess that's in the flow or in the zone or something, but if you're forcing it, that's a sign that take a step back, I think.
Yeah. I think it's so, and this conversation is just another, a really beautiful example of just how much we have to learn about life through the creative process. Like I'm listening to you going like that. I mean, what you just said around it, if it feels forced, like it's not right. I mean, that's true for dance. It's true for writing. It's true for career and parenting and relationships. I mean, all kinds of, right? Like we just learn all of life's lessons through these creative pursuits.
Yeah.
Um, I think that's it's really powerful. So, well, I have to tell you, Gavin, I learned so much from you. I love your book. I really do. And I love the spirit of this conversation. I think people have a lot to learn from you, both as a writer, as an artist, but as a teacher of life. I'm going to remind everyone, Gavin's book is called Being a Ballerina. It's really like, I always joke when I love a book so much that I kind of want to eat it. Like it's just like I got in there and really devoured the book. And I want to thank you for writing it and for spending this time with us. It's been really fun to chat with you today.
Thank you so much, Grace. This has been incredibly gratifying to dialogue with you about it and to dissect and think about and talk about. And I'm, really, really passionate about dance and about ballet, but also just about people and what makes them tick and what makes us tick. And I think we can all benefit from really digging into that, and particularly using our creative lives as a way to do so. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yes, you're a really wonderful example of that. I know you'll inspire many, many people. So thank you so much, Gavin.
Thank you, Grace.
I hope you found this episode helpful, idea-provoking, and inspiring, especially if you're in the midst of creating or clarifying your next chapter. I can't even put into words how much I appreciate you, your vulnerability, your stories of creating a life and meaningful work amidst adversity, grief, ever-changing and challenging times, and of course, life's peaks and uncertain valleys. You are seekers, wisdom sharers, and artists of life, and together we can build meaningful next chapters that feel aligned with who we really are, what we're put on this earth to do, and how we can make a difference one human being at a time. Please subscribe on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts, and I would love it if you could leave a review for the art of what's next. If you know someone who wants to create a new chapter or who would appreciate this episode, please share it with them. You can text it to them or email them the link or post about the show on your Instagram. If you want more help in creating your own meaningful next chapter, join the Hivory newsletter to get inspiration, stories, and resources to help you create your next chapter like an artist. Sign up at thehivory.com/podcast or at the link in the show notes.